Hello and welcome to Intermittent Gaming Reviews, where we're looking at The Surge 2 on the PlayStation 4. I should start with a little disclaimer, say that the game code was provided to us by the publisher for review, and we'll jump straight into the review right there. Okay, I'm going to start with the presentation of the game. In particular, the graphics. Now, The Surge 2 is by no means a bad looking game, but it definitely has a few issues with textures and pop-ins, and particularly in busier areas, character model textures will take a while to pop in, really noticeable on the menus as well. But apart from that, it's actually not a bad looking game at all. There's a lot of nice details in the levels, and nice little details in the character models, and the enemy designs and stuff, so there is a lot going on there. It is just a shame that at times it can kind of chug along and you lose some of these textures and therefore lose some of these details as you're sort of making your way through the game. Okay, when it comes to gameplay, The Surge 2 is definitely kind of cut from the same cloth as the Dark Souls or Bloodborne sort of style game, very much like The Surge 1 was. Big differences here though is that rather than being told or being forced down a specific character's storyline in The Surge 1, you do get, there's quite a robust character design at the very start. We recorded a let's play of the first 90 minutes of the game, which I kind of go into the ups and downs of the character selection, character creation I should say, at the start of the game. So if you want to have a look, check out my thoughts on that, go and check the video on the Intermittent Gaming YouTube. So I won't say too much more about that. The comparisons to Dark Souls, Bloodborne, that kind of game are fair. There are a lot of gameplay elements that do mimic what we know from those games, so things like save points, kind of resetting the game world. The big difference here is that instead of bonfires or this sort of firesides that you might rest at, you get the medical bays in The Surge 2. And that is where you can kind of upgrade your character. You can spend some of the scrap tech that you'll collect by defeating enemies to upgrade and enhance weaponry, character stats, that kind of thing. And when you come out of that, the game has essentially reset. Again, much like Bloodborne or Dark Souls, the world has reset apart from a few key elements. So whenever you defeat a boss, if you kind of survive the boss battle, the boss won't be respawned, but any of the sort of henchmen or underlings that have been around them, they will have respawned. Also, similar to Dark Souls and Bloodborne, you kind of progress in the game, and then you're also going to unlock and find shortcuts back to a med bay, which sort of allow you to progress quicker after your next save, after your next upgrade. You get to kind of head through a shortcut that you've unlocked. So there's definitely a lot of comparisons that I think are quite fairly made to that series. There's quite an interesting retrieval mechanic, which is a little bit different from those, but I really enjoyed that. I really kind of thought it was a good idea in The Surge 2, where if you happen to get killed, which I'll come back onto later on, but if you happen to get killed and you'll drop your equipment, you'll drop the scrap tech that you've picked up, and any other bits and bobs that you might have, and you'll go back to your most recent save, most recent med bay, and you'll have to kind of progress again from there. Now, whereas in something like Bloodborne, where your the souls that you collected, or whatever it was, whatever they were called in Bloodborne, you would have to try and fight your way back to those to recollect them, and if you died on the way, they were gone forever. Now that mechanic is here, but it's given a sort of sense of urgency because it's also on a timer, so it's not just a case of surviving long enough to get back to it. You've actually got to do it within a certain time. which sounds like a bit of a pain. However, the game does sort of work with you in the other sense that the sort of scrap tech that you've dropped after a death will actually kind of generate some health. It almost like pulses out with a bit of a cure, a kind of health boost when you're nearby. So if you kind of hang off picking it up, you can get yourself a little bit of kind of revitalizing your energy, which means that if you die on a boss fight, which I inevitably did, when you come back to that boss, whilst your tech is still there, if you don't go straight in and pick it up, you can actually get a bit of a health boost from it, which can make the boss fights just that little bit easier. Health isn't as scarce as Bloodborne or Dark Souls, because it also has the mechanic you can see as you're attacking. You're sort of filling up a blue kind of electrical energy bar below, and you can use what you've charged there to give yourself like an immediate health boost. So again, the mechanic is structured in such a way that rather than just running away from fights and going to find the med bay if you're low on health, it might actually be more worth your while seeking out some lower spec, lower skilled enemies and just kicking hell out of them to charge your energy and getting your health back that way. Again, another mechanic that I quite enjoyed. I thought it was quite cleverly done to keep the kind of onus on pushing forward and attacking rather than trying to just get stuck on the defensive all the time. While we're on the topic of the combat, there is also another interesting mechanic within the combat that allows you to actually target enemies, sort of specific parts of enemies, like their body, their head, their left arm, their right arm, and you'll get different pickups, different things for upgrade, different materials depending on what you target. So that again, that's pretty cool. Just something similar to, but kind of handled a lot better here than in the first game. The combat itself is probably the strong point of the game. It's satisfying. It's brutal. It's got great sort of crunch sounds. Interesting nuances, like I mentioned before, the targeting specific parts. Now you'll definitely want to try and keep the enemy numbers low in terms of how many you fight. Because in the early part of the game you're never really having to face off against more than one or two enemies, which is completely doable just by dodging, timing your attacks, blocking if need be, and just getting stuck in, targeting parts, ripping parts off, and off you go. A little later in the game it can be very easy to get swarmed by multiple enemies, and that can be incredibly difficult. That's kind of where a lot of the game's challenge comes from, more so than any particularly horrific boss fights, at least in as far as I've played so far. I've definitely had problems with the bosses, but they've always felt like, you know, that's a surmountable problem. We can kind of take our time and get through that. The flip side is that even some of your most basic enemies, if you've got 2 or 3 of them coming at you at once, and maybe also an extra one who's got a long range weapon, it can just feel like an impossible task, which can get a little frustrating at times. So yeah, death does come quick if you're not careful with the amount of enemies that you sort of invite into the fight, especially as you progress further into the game. Okay, so final thoughts on the game are, overall I'd say it's got a very good or decent gameplay loop, thoroughly enjoyable combat, which, as I say, I think is the game's strength. And I suppose little bugs aside in terms of the graphical pop in from textures and things, that's all kind of allowable. I'm not really getting hung up on that. However, the level design itself is a little uninspired. It's not, though there's some variation in the locales, there's not a feeling of sort of intricately designed, well-woven levels that you're sort of finding your way through and back through. Again, like in a Bloodborne or Dark Souls-esque way. It definitely, though it's been inspired in many parts by that, the level design does feel a little uninspired, which can make the game feel a little bit, dare I say, dull at times. There are some with the strong combat. That mechanic does kind of keep you driving forward, but it's not a game I find myself desperate to come back to after a long gameplay session. It's been enjoyable, but it's not something that I can, I won't be hunting down the platinum trophy on this game, and which is a shame, because I think there's a lot of good here, but it is just let down by kind of repetitive nature of the level design, more so than the combat. Yeah, overall I'm quite impressed with it. I've sort of hovered around a 6 or 7 out of 10 for my experience with the Surge. I don't normally give half marks, so I would give this a 6.5, but because I've always said that I'm going to stick to whole numbers, I'm going to be kind, and I'm going to round up, and I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10. But it's not a strong 7 out of 10. There's a lot good here, and the Surge is definitely a series that I would want to keep an eye on as it develops, because this game's just some quality level design and a couple of technical tweaks away from being something that's really worthy of note. So watch this space. It's not quite there yet, but in time, who knows, maybe the Surge 3 will be the one that really turns a corner. Okay, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button for when more of our reviews hit the net. Thank you very much. I've been Rich, and this has been Intermittent Gaming. Now it's time for another intermission.